Good morning. And thank you for that kind introduction. I am delighted to be here, and I'm grateful for Bruce and Chad Wessel for hosting us and for showing off their John Deere tractor a few minutes ago. I can't think of a more fitting setting for today's conversation. A farm that has been a source of one family's nourishment and pride for 4 generations, and a land that bears the marks of over a century of one family's labor and providence. A place that ties together with bonds as thick as blood the lives of Ryder and Reed, Chad's sons, who are just beginning their journey in life with the life of their great-grandfather, whose earthly journey has long since ended. In so many ways, the family farm is a microcosm of America. We are a nation founded by farmers. Washington and Jefferson, for all their skill with sword and pen, considered themselves foremostly to be farmers. It was an army of farmers who picked up their muskets to preserve their natural rights and defy the tyranny of a far-off king in our War of Independence. Their courage and providence freed us from that tyranny and gave us a constitution that is the envy of the world. We are a nation fed by farmers. America has been blessed with abundant natural resources, and none more important than our millions of acres of arable land. And thanks to our farmers, we have made great use of them, feeding not only ourselves, but the whole world. Indeed, after World War II, when Europe stood on the brink of starvation and communism, it was America's farmers that saved Europe and secured America's position as the greatest power the world has ever seen. And we are a nation that are proud of our farmers. For 250 years, a sacred bond has tied our nation to her farmers, filling each citizen with a sense of immense gratitude for their work and admiration for their way of life. The reverence we show to our nation's farmers is part of our national DNA. Our first 5 presidents were farmers, and each extolled farming as a virtuous way of life rather than merely as a means of living. They also believed that farmers are rightly America's most valued citizens. Jefferson, for example, conceived of America as an empire of liberty spanning the continent, sustained and advanced by a majority of yeoman farmers who owned their own land. For Jefferson and many other framers, farmers were the quintessentially virtuous citizens because they were, as Jefferson said, tied to their country and wedded to its liberty and interests by the most lasting bonds, the cultivation of their land. Jefferson distinguished the independent yeoman farmer from the speculator, the banker, and the stock jobber, whose interest in America was primarily financial and therefore weaker than the farmers, who depended upon the very soil of the country for their subsistence. For the founders, America was not an idea, it was not a market, it was a people tied to a land. The farmers did not extol the virtues of the intellectual or the financier. They elevated the yeoman farmer precisely because, more than anyone else, the farmer has a stake in the land that is this nation's very foundation. And for that reason, Americans have always had a stake in supporting our nation's farmers, and even more so in our present age. For as supposedly connected as we all are to each other in a virtual world, we are increasingly disconnected from the land that is our common home. We are increasingly, by supporting our nation's farmers so closely tied to our homeland, we show love for our country and gratitude for all the great goods that spring from it. Unfortunately, some care more about power and the financial gains that can be had by power. Rather than revere and respect their fellow citizens, they plunder and pillage the hard-earned gains of others. Our nation's founding farmers fought against such economic tyranny no less than they fought against political tyranny. They would not be the thralls either of a king in the court of St. James or of a lender in London. Our antitrust laws emerged from the same impulse as our revolution, resistance to tyranny. When Senator John Sherman, a conservative Republican, introduced the law that would later bear his name, he explained that monopoly was, quote, a kingly prerogative inconsistent with our form of government. If we will not endure a king as a political power, we should not endure a king over the production, transportation, and sale of any of the necessities of life. If we would not submit to an emperor, we should not submit to an autocrat of trade. Fighting such tyranny, he warned, would require strong resistance of the state and national authorities. Just as farmers led the charge in our war against political tyranny, so too did farmers lead the fight against economic tyranny. Farmers were among the foremost advocates of our nation's first antitrust laws, and rightly so. Farmers suffered greatly under the yoke of the railroad cartels, the grain elevator monopolies, the meat packer oligopolies, and the commodities trusts. And it's no surprise that farmers would be among the first to take action to protect the nation's economic independence. Remember, Jefferson elevated the yeoman farmer precisely because of his independence and his desire to protect his independence. Our antitrust laws and the fight of Midwestern farmers to pass them thus were about restoring economic self-rule just as our revolution restored political self-rule. These laws protect everyday citizens from the abuse of economic power and preserve their independence from aspiring private tyrants. What do I mean by independence? I think Thomas Jefferson had it right when he explained that the farmer is the most independent and the most virtuous of our nation's citizens because his subsistence does not depend on the caprice of customers, that is, the arbitrary decisions of others, as was the case for merchants or artisans or for lawyers. The farmer's subsistence depended only upon heaven above and his own soil and industry below. The independent farmer labors more to increase his own gain. Doing so, of course, increases the gain of the whole community. But the independent farmer does not labor for a master, he labors for himself. When a person or entity enjoys excess market power over the farmer, however, the opposite occurs. The farmer labors more for the benefit of those with power over him than he does for himself. In that case, he is more slave than farmer, compelled to work for another's gain rather than his own. That's why I and my fellow antitrust enforcers in the Trump administration do not want to see our farmers held hostage by corporate monopolists. We won't stand idly by when farmers are victimized by unlawful competitive practices that undermine their livelihood and their independence. On this score, the FTC has taken a leading role. We have two major cases challenging anti-competitive practices that we believe have contributed to higher costs and a diminished livelihood for America's farmers. In one case, the FTC, along with several states, challenged the allegedly monopolistic practices of the John Deere Corporation. We believe that John Deere monopolized the market for the repair of farm equipment, which has unduly restricted your right to repair your own equipment or to seek an independent repair shop, and has imposed higher repair costs on you. In other words, we believe that John Deere made our nation's farmers more dependent on them to make necessary repairs to their own machinery, compelling them to spend more of their labor on expanding the profits of John Deere and less on themselves and their families. Likewise, the FTC has sued Syngenta and Corteva, alleging that they have driven up the price of pesticides by paying distributors not to purchase products from competing pesticide makers. This form of monopolistic behavior hurts not only farming by driving up their prices, but all Americans who must pay for these increased prices at the grocery store. It enriches powerful chemical companies and the distributors to the financial detriment of farmers and their families. Rather than engage with farmers on equally and mutually beneficial terms, we believe these companies are trying to reduce farmers to servitude, using their market power to appropriate an ever-increasing amount of your gains. And today there's more. I'm going to make a little news with you. I'm announcing that on my order, the Commission some time ago commenced a major industry-wide investigation into the precipitous rise of fertilizer prices in this country, which has affected so many of our nation's farmers, including everyone in this room, including the issuance of compulsory process. USDA data have shown that the single largest increase in input costs for farmers across the United States since 2020 has come from fertilizer. With one industry study reporting that farm bankruptcies climbed 46% last year compared to 2024, these continued price increases are not something our nation, much less our farmers, can continue to ignore. High prices, of course, do not always mean that something illegal is afoot, but when examining an industry that has rapidly consolidated, with just a few corporations now controlling a substantial majority of fertilizer sales in the United States, we cannot rule out the possibility that sustained price increases for fertilizer may be the result of anti-competitive conduct on the part of these very companies. As my friend and colleague, Deputy Secretary of Agriculture Stephen Vaden told the Texas Farm Bureau just a few months ago, when you only have a few competitors in a market, That just by its natural status leads to situations where you cannot be sure that the price you are paying for a commodity is the actual market price because there are not enough people in there mixing it up to fight for your business. As an antitrust enforcer, my task will be to determine whether our laws have been broken, and if so, to bring the lawbreakers to justice and to stop their anti-competitive conduct in its tracks. The consolidation that led us to today's conditions was not inevitable. As chairman, I take seriously my mandate to block anti-competitive mergers that threaten our most critical industries and to challenge the pernicious conduct that tends to proliferate when past enforcers refrained from blocking bad deals that enriched today's dominant players. Under my leadership, I assure you, the FTC is prioritizing protecting you and your livelihood. If we find that anyone has broken the antitrust laws and victimized our farmers through anti-competitive behavior, I will not hesitate to act. Under the leadership of President Trump, the FTC will be working day in and day out to support our farmers and to preserve their independence, their livelihood, and their way of life. Indeed, the FTC and our partners at the Department of Agriculture will be examining competition issues in other agriculture markets to make sure that America's farmers and the consumers that they feed reap the benefits of competition: lower prices, more innovation, and more choice. You can expect joint actions from the department and from the FTC very soon. I launched the fertilizer investigation because I heard from America's farmers that something was amiss, and I'm here today because I want to learn more. Effective law enforcement in the agriculture markets relies on the intelligence and leads that only you, America's farmers, can provide. Now, I know that speaking out about what you're seeing in the market can put you in a difficult position, especially when you don't have many options for where to source your inputs. And I've heard stories that some companies do not take kindly to you telling your elected officials and your law enforcers about the problems that you have encountered. That's why the FTC is unequivocally committed to making the process of engaging with us and talking to us as transparent and confidential as possible. To that end, just last week, we added a section to our public website that describes in detail the confidentiality protections that sources and witnesses can expect. I want to say this. The FTC, under my leadership, will protect the secrecy of your identity and any information you provide to the maximum extent possible. We want you talking to us. We can't help you if you don't, and we will protect you if you do. As you all know, I am, sadly, a lawyer by trade. But one of the greatest practitioners of my craft, the Roman statesman Cicero, once wrote, "Of all the occupations, none is better, more delightful, more abundant, and more fitting for a free man than farming." Having grown up in the Shenandoah Valley, historically the breadbasket of the American South, I agree with Cicero's sentiment and with Jefferson's vision. We are a nation founded by farmers, and we inherited from them that distinctly American desire for freedom and for independence. As Americans, we can show no greater piety toward our founding farmers than to preserve the freedom, the independence, and the flourishing of the family farm. Thanks to President Trump, we are keeping our farmers free, and your farms fertile, so that in future generations, you will till the soil, the same soil as your forebears, and carry in your heart the same love for the land, people, and freedom of the United States as the generations